During the Second World War, the 1st Infantry Division was on the front lines from the very beginning of our involvement in the war against Nazi Germany, from the landings in North Africa, through the Mediterranean, in Sicily, and then on to the bloody beaches of Omaha, the Battle of the Bulge, the advance into Germany, the fighting in Central Europe. During the Second World War, the 1st Infantry Division defined the fight for freedom against fascism. On a personal note, I, Andrew, with Modern Military History Podcast, modernmilitaryhistory.com, my grandfather was in the 1st Infantry Division. It is with great pleasure, humble honor, and an absolute privilege that for all of these reasons, today on the Modern Military History Podcast, we have the privilege of interviewing a World War II 1st Infantry Division veteran of the Big Red One, John Long. Sir, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great today, and Andrew, I want you to know it's a privilege and honor for me to be able to participate in your program.
Oh, thank you so much. Sir, let's start from the beginning. Where were you born?
I was born and I grew up in the city of Buffalo, New York, of western New York, of Buffalo, of the New York State.
Okay, gotcha. And what year were you born, sir?
I was born January 18th, 1927. That means I'm 94 years old.
Wow. Do you remember the Great Depression at all?
Yes, I would say that I was a Depression baby. Mm-hmm. I was one of 10 children. I was the 10th child born.
Wow.
And that was, as I said, the Great Depression was during the late 30s and the early 40s and all of that. And then, of course, World War II came along.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember the kind of things? So you were one of 10 children. Did I hear that correctly?
You heard it, absolutely. Yes.
Do you remember what it was like for your family to keep things together, keep food on the plate during the Great Depression with 10 kids, 10 hungry kids? What was that like? Do you remember anything about that?
Andrew, I remember it very vividly, as if it almost happened just yesterday.
Wow.
Yes, there was very little food around. There were very few jobs around. My dad did whatever he had to do. My dad was a carpenter contractor.
Mm-hmm.
And ironically, in the late 30s, he helped form what they called the Carpenters Union. But at that time, there were just about no jobs available. And ironically, I remember around the holidays, the Carpenters Union and some other organization would bring baskets of food to our home on days like Thanksgiving and the holidays and that sort of thing. It was not a very, very, I don't know exactly how to describe it, but it seemed like we were all family, and we all pulled together, worked together, and so we managed to get through those days of the Depression.
Wow. Do you remember during that time? I mean, how old were you? In the mid-30s, were you in school? What was that like for you, kind of going through the Depression as a young kid?
Well, it was ironic. We were all young kids, all from wonderful families. We all were confronted with the same sort of circumstances, all the families, and we all had deep faiths, of course, and it seemed like we all got through it very well, and we succeeded in whatever we were trying to do, and families succeeded. And then, of course, as you recall, World War II broke out, and then tons of jobs were created in all of the industries, and it was at that time then we began to break out of that, the so-called depression and recession, and moved forward as a country.
Gotcha. Do you remember December 7th, 1941?
I know exactly where I was and at exactly the time. I was, at one time I thought I wanted to be an electrician, and I went to a vocational high school called Seneca Vocational High School. I was in my freshman year, and I was sitting at my desk that morning. It was around 9:30 in the morning, and the teacher at that time announced that Pearl Harbor had taken place, the bombing of Pearl Harbor. To this moment, I remember it so very vividly. I couldn't quite understand what was going on at that age. I don't know, I think at that time I was something like 14, 15, 16 years old or something like that. But, yeah, I remember very vividly when that took place.
What were the reactions of your community in Buffalo, New York? What was the reaction to the bombing of Pearl Harbor?
Stunned, shocked. Never thought anything like what could possibly happen. You know, as you recall, Adolf Hitler was marching through all of Europe, one country after another. We saw that happening. We weren't directly involved. We maintained a rather neutral position. But of course, at the bombing of Pearl Harbor, our commander-in-chief, President Roosevelt, had no choice but declare war, and that's how we got into the World War II.
Yeah.
We're stunned. Obviously, who would have thought something like that was going to? Nobody.
Wow.
And of course, we were determined. Americans come together, and it's amazing to me how the unity that took place at that time. You know, at that time, Andrew, I remember when I arrived on Camp Wheeler, Georgia, for intensive infantry training in July of 1945. And there were 3,000 of us kids, and I didn't realize at 18 years of age we were just kids, as I look back now being 94. But there were 3,000 of us arrived there from our separation centers,
wow.
And all at one time. We didn't know one another. We had no acquaintances, but within a matter of 4 or 5 days, we were military buddies. We got to know each other. And the irony about it is we never asked one another, are you Irish? Are you Polish? Are you Republican? Are you conservative? No. We were all Americans. We arrived there for one purpose, to fight for the country we loved.
Wow.
And that's what we did.
So, you were 18... You were 18 by July of 45, is that correct?
I just turned 18 years of age in January of 1920, January of 1945.
Gotcha. And did you join the military, or were you drafted?
No, I came home from high school one day. I was in my senior high, and I was looking forward to a career in professional baseball. I was being scouted by the old Brooklyn Dodgers of New York State. I came home one day and my mother handed me this little card. She says, "You got some mail here from Uncle Sam." I said, "What in the world why I'm so popular?" It was my draft notice. My draft notice.
Wow.
30 days later, I was on a troop train heading to Camp Fort Dix, New Jersey, which was the center and the reception center.
Wow.
We spent a few days there, and then I found myself on a troop train with about 3,000 other guys heading to Camp Wheeler, Georgia, for intensive infantry training.
Wow. Did you, how did your folks feel about you getting drafted and you going off to fight?
Well, they were very proud of me. My other brothers and my sisters were very proud of the fact that I was going to serve the country. Mm-hmm. My older brothers were working in what they called plants, industries that were making war products or what have you. Mm-hmm. And most of them were deferred because of that. Mm-hmm. But I didn't have that choice.
Wow.
I was up and ready, and that was it. And I was happy and proud to be able to do that at the time.
Wow. And I have to ask, so before you were drafted, and as you were, going through school, doing things a teenage kid does, what was it like? What was it like to live in the United States while the Second World War was raging? 43, 44, 45. What was that culture like? What was it like in the country for you to grow up then?
Well, it was ironic because we knew that the war was going on. We knew what was happening as Hitler was marching through from one country to another. America maintained, I guess, what you'd call a sort of a neutral position at that time, and we were, I would say, sort of overwhelmed with the fact that all that was going on, and America was still not involved in it. And of course, if you'll remember, the history of it was that England, Winston Churchill played a major part in the United States really getting into the war, because England was down at its knees almost. It was round the clock bombing at that time by the Germans, and so we all lived through it, and it was an amazing experience because we never knew from month to month, day to day, where we were going to be in that whole situation.
Right.
Except that we were America, the land of the free and the brave.
Right. Do you I kind of I'm just so curious about, like, during the run up to the American involvement in the Second World War, did you think that most Americans wanted to go stop what Hitler was doing, or do you think most Americans were okay with kind of minding their own business as a country? What was the national sentiment? What was the feeling of the country, before December 7th, 41?
Well, I think the general feeling was, at some point in place, when was this going to affect us to the extent where it was really going to be affecting us in our home front?
Yeah.
And I think most Americans were I don't want to say an ambivalent frame of mind, but I think everybody was wondering at what point in place were we going to get involved?
Right.
Because we sure as hell didn't want Nazism to spread any further than it had, and the best place to stop it was then and there, right over there, rather than having to stop it from our own shores here in America.
Do you have any memories of the headlines of the fighting that was going on through, the American involvement in the war?
Well, we had two newspapers at one time here in Buffalo. There was one called the Courier Express, that paper is no longer here, and the Buffalo News, which is now the main paper. And I remember back in those days, yes, the headlines were always Hitler now is taking over this country, or Hitler stormtroopers were this and that and other. Well, the headlines were always there. And as I said, I think it was with most Americans, I think it was not a question of whether or not we were going to ever enter that war. It was a question of when and where we were going to enter that war. Right. And of course, the bombing of Pearl Harbor, that was it. There was no two ways about it. That was a wake up call. Right.
I think as somebody, I'm 26, so obviously I'm pretty far removed from the real experience of having lived through this time. All I can really say is that I think a lot of people looking at World War II now, today, they have an idea that, well, it's hard for them to understand. It's hard for, I guess, anybody, including myself. But I mean, I've read enough about the history that I can kind of understand that there is a certain amount of uncertainty about whether or not we could win against Hitler and the Japanese early on in the war. Would you say that the country was uncertain, early on in the war about whether or not we could win?
I don't think so. I think the main thing at that time was we knew we had to unify. We knew we had to march forward under one flag, the American flag. And I think we knew that if we were able to put our industrial complex in a position to do what we had to do to produce the armaments or what. I think the general feeling was that we would win, but the question was at what price were we going to win?
Oh, okay.
Remember, we left 400,000 young kids behind that never came back home.
Yeah.
We paid a huge price for what we had to do.
Right. Very true. I remember I've had the privilege of visiting the American Cemetery at Omaha Beach.
Yes.
And it is one of the most moving physical places I have ever been. I had been traveling alone for quite some time up to that point, and I hadn't seen any other Americans for quite some time. And then suddenly I found myself completely surrounded by not only Americans, but people my own age. And it was incredibly moving. And something I always try to bring that feeling, I try to bring that emotion to people when talking about World War II to my generation, to the current generation, because it isn't all just glory and victory. It's incredibly sad, and it's incredibly moving history that I really want people to understand.
Well, let me just say this to you, Andrew.
Uh-huh.
What do they call you, Andrew or Andy? Which one?
You get to pick.
Okay. Here in Buffalo, we have what we call the Buffalo and Erie County Naval and Military Park.
Okay.
And I was awarded the Chairman's Award in 2016.
Wow.
By the board of directors at the Naval Park.
Mm-hmm.
And I adopted a phrase saying that this was the heart and soul of all of the veterans in Western New York. Mm. And I've always felt this way, that if I could generate the kind of interest and concern for people not to forget what went on in World War II, the deep price that we paid, I was really doing a great thing to help people remember that. Yeah. And I think what you're pointing out is, yes, we have to continue to do things and remind people of this freedoms that we have in this country. They never were free. Yeah. Never free. It's never free. We paid a huge, big price for it.
Yes.
And we're continuing to do that. Let me tell you this. I have my wife's son is now a full colonel.
Wow.
And he had 2 tours in Iraq. And he's now head of a huge, large intelligence organization. And when he was doing his work, we were very worried about it. He had 2 tours in Iraq. Mm-hmm. And we used to sit and wait for that phone to ring one way or another. Mm. And I remember one day, towards the end of his tours, combat tour, he called and he said, "Mom, I'm out of the combat zone. I'm safe now." And what a great relief that was to his mother and, of course, to me also. Mm-hmm. So my point with you is we have to continue to re-inoculate, I guess that's a pretty good word.
Yes.
Re-inoculate our American people about what America is all about, the greatness of America. And what really disturbs me is in our schools today, Andrew.
Yes.
When I was a kid growing up, we had courses like civics and American history. Mm-hmm. I want you to find me a school today where they have those courses. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So if we don't take steps to, as I said, do what's necessary to remind people the great prices we pay for war, we'll be making a major blunder mistake. I don't like right now what's going on in our country. I'll be very honest with you.
My mission with modern military history is to bring military history to the modern audience. The title Modern Military History is kind of a play on that that sentiment. I think that using things like what we're doing right now, like a podcast. I also make videos. I have a website where I can post written things and pictures. Kind of combining all those modern medias with the internet is a great way to reach young people, because I completely agree with you, sir. What happened in the 20th century, especially during the Second World War, we cannot forget as a people, and we can't forget the reality of what happened. So, again, it's just being able to speak with you today, and I've been kind of asking you very just straightforward questions about the experience of World War II from your perspective as somebody who lived it, because it's such a great way to ground those of us who obviously weren't there back in the reality of that. So again, it's just an absolute privilege to have you with us today, sir.
Let me say this to you. About a month ago, down at Naval Park, we had a ceremony where, I don't know if you ever heard of our latest Medal of Honor winner. And David Ballavia. David Ballavia. He's a personal friend of mine. He's a Medal of Honor. And we had something like about 35, 40 young recruits that he swore into military service.
Wow.
And he gave the most inspiring talk to these young kids. He wrote a book. It's called House to House, and of course he was in house-to-house combat.
Yeah.
In Iraq, these kids were just, I could see them absorbing everything he was telling them, how important it was the service they're giving to their country. And to have something like that, a Medal of Honor guy do that, it was really very inspiring to watch that happen.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. And a great service to the community that you're doing there. I want to come back to 1945, and you've been drafted. And at that point, the war with Germany was it was winding down.
That's right.
Yeah, what was that like to watch that happen? Watch the war in Europe winding down.
Well, of course, we were very proud of the fact that was happening. There was no question about it. But at the time, at July of 1945, we were concerned what was going to be happening with Japan, the Japanese, and in the South Pacific and what have you. Yeah. And yes, we were happy to see one war wind down. What I call the ETO, European Theater Operations. But see, when we went down to Camp Wheeler, Georgia, we were told probably in the month of September, as I recall, the end of September, that what we were being trained for was intensive infantry, hand-to-hand combat, because we were going to be the soldiers to invade Japan.
Right.
And that's what we were being prepared for mentally and physically.
Gosh.
Well, of course, we all know on the 14th, I think it was the 14th of August, the president that I love dearly, even though I'm a lifelong Republican, excuse injecting here, President Harry Truman, he didn't even know, by the way, when he became he was not aware, believe it or not, when he became the vice president, that we had the Manhattan Project, which was the nuclear bomb project.
Right.
And a lot of that, by the way, was being worked on right here in Western New York.
Right.
The industrial plants. So what happened then, of course, the president in his great wisdom, he was told that we were being trained to invade Japan, and we were being trained hand-to-hand combat, and we were being very clearly told, either you kill or be killed. And we had literally was going to have to burn the Japs out of the holes that they were living in with flamethrowers and what have you.
Yeah.
The hand-to-hand combat. And, of course, the president in his great wisdom, thank God, because that's what spared my life. I feel very confidently.
Yeah.
He dropped the nuclear bombs. That ended the war in Japan.
Right.
As you remember, MacArthur on the board of Missouri signed the surrender papers. So they didn't know. Then all of a sudden we found out that we were being assigned to the Big Red 1 Infantry. We were going to be all sent over, which we were, sent over into Germany, into the Army of Occupation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happened to all of us. We were sent over there, and that's where we served out the rest of our time in the military.
Wow. So I'm very curious about what it was like to, train to fight the Japanese army. I'm very curious because fighting the Japanese military in the Second World War, it was a different animal from fighting the Germans. The Japanese did not surrender. They were willing to commit suicide before surrendering. I'm thinking about the incredible Battle of Okinawa, where, if I remember correctly, my history, the Japanese sent a massive kamikaze attack against the American fleet off of Okinawa, and that really opened the eyes of the American public, the American military, and the politicians like the president to just how far the Japanese would go once we had stepped on their home soil. So when you were training in the States, getting ready to go over there, what specifics do you remember about training to fight the Japanese army at this point in the war?
Well, the main thrust at that time was you were an infantry soldier, and it's either kill or be killed.
Mm-hmm.
That's up to you. You're either going to kill the enemy or you're going to be killed yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, that makes you realize that you better do what you got to do to stay alive.
Right.
And we were told the Japs don't surrender, and that we'd have to burn. We had flamethrowers that would go 30 feet from the person that was using it. We had to burn these guys out of their holes that we were living in. And, we were it was ironic. Our mindset and our psychology and our mental attitudes were just that. We were soldiers, and we had to do what we had to do to destroy the enemy.
Right.
And that's what we were prepared to do. And at the end of infantry training, combat, bayonet work, it was just psychologically, that's what they prepared us for.
You just mentioned bayonet training. What kind of weapons did you guys train on?
Well, we had what they called an M1 rifle, which was an automatic rifle.
Yes, sir.
But those were the old M1s, and then they had another smaller, I don't know what they call it, the carbine.
The carbine, the M1 carbine, yeah.
But most of us infantry guys, we were using the M1 rifles with the bayonet that was attached, of course, at the end of the rifle. So we were, as I said, it was all hand-to-hand combat that we were being trained with.
Wow.
That's what we were told that we had to deal with.
Wow.
And I don't know what else to tell you, except that, we were prepared to do that, but, and I remember watching the films and talking to guys that were involved in the landings in Normandy and Omaha Beach, and a lot of guys never got out of the water, guys never got off the beaches there.
That's right. It's just, my grandpa was in the 16th Regiment of the 1st Infantry Division, and that's they hit the beach. Yeah, they hit the beach at Omaha. My grandfather, he was in his 30s and had 3 kids by 1944, and he was drafted in late 44, and he went over as a replacement. And he was absorbed into this unit that had hit the beach at Omaha, had incredible amounts of combat experience. I mean, I started the podcast off with just kind of a quick explanation of the 1st Infantry's involvement in the Second World War. I mean, the reason the 1st Infantry Division was sent in at Omaha was because they had had such incredible experience. I mean, they'd been fighting since North Africa. My question...
They came up through North Africa, through Sicily.
Right.
And, right up on through Italy, into France, and then on up, Copy
that. My question for you, sir, and this is something, I I don't want to get too personal, but I never was able to speak with my grandfather who fought in the 1st Infantry Division. He was taken by cancer, relatively young.
Yeah.
And I think about him a lot, especially since I'm so passionate about military history. But I always wanted to ask him, and I'll ask you, sir, what was it like once you joined the 1st Infantry as a new guy? What was it like to join this unit that was legendary at this point, especially after Omaha Beach? I mean, this was a legendary unit, and for good reason. What was it like for you as a fresh replacement, as a fresh guy coming in from the States, 18 years old? What was that like?
Well, most of us, I would say practically all of us, were overwhelmed with the fact that we were becoming part of one of the most famous infantry units of the United States services, the United States Army. And the history that behind that, as you know, even starting in World War I.
Mm-hmm.
And we were overwhelmed with passion, the fact that we'd become a part of that. But the most important thing was we knew that we had to continue on with the great tradition, duty first. That was the last part of our duty first. Mm-hmm. And our duty was to uphold the greatness of that military infantry unit for the greatness that it established at a huge, terrible price of life. And at that time, as I said, we were overwhelmed with that, but we knew that we had a great honor to uphold the honor of that organization.
Copy that. So did you get to serve side by side with veterans of, guys who had been fighting through Normandy or even before? Were there still a lot of those guys around?
Oh yes, there were a lot of those guys still. When we finally arrived in Germany, and I'll never forget, it was in December. It was almost Christmas Eve. We arrived in Germany. It was cold and snowy as hell, and I'll never forget, we went over on the Liberty ships, they used to call them. I don't know whether you knew that or not. And this was called the Texarkana Liberty ship. And I'll never forget it because there were 3,000 of us, as I said, that boarded that ship. And it was a cold, wintry night right there in the New York Harbor. But they took the North Atlantic route to get to Bremerhaven, Germany. Mm-hmm. And that was the closest I ever got to the White Cliffs of Dover in England.
Wow.
But at that time, I thought I was a pretty wise, smart little guy, and when we boarded the ship, they had these bunks. There were 5 bunks that you had to climb from the bottom up. And I thought, well, hell, I'm not going to climb up there. I have to climb up and down there to go to the head at night. So I grabbed the first one, the closest one at the bottom. Mm-hmm. Well, guess what? They took the North Atlantic route. It was miserable. And the second night out, every one of those guys above me got deathly seasick.
Oh, no.
So guess what? I got out of there that night. The next 2 nights, I found a warm place on the deck of the ship that was safe, and wrapped myself in my army blankets.
Oh, no.
Because I didn't want to be in the place that I was.
Oh, my God.
But when we did arrive in Bremerhaven, Germany, the most wonderful thing happened. They put us on a troop train, and we were, I don't know how long we were out, but anyways, on Christmas Day, they pulled up alongside a place along the track, and they opened the doors, and there was the big red one guys that all prepared a Christmas dinner for us. And then we were out in the snow, standing in line, getting our metal muskets.
Oh, wow.
filled with Christmas dinner. And then, of course, when we got over there, yes, a lot of those guys were combat soldiers for the big red one. They would share some of the stories with us. For instance, Würzburg, when we arrived in Würzburg, where the closest they could find was for us to stay was a bombed out old German brewery. Part of it was still standing, and that's where they put us for a short period of time. Mm-hmm. But yes, some of those guys were part of the Battle of the Bulge. You remember that famous battle? Mm-hmm. Some of the guys were part of other important battles all through Germany, and they shared, with us some of what they had seen and experienced, and some of them, of course, many of them couldn't talk about it because some of of the experience was so traumatic psychologically that I think they were fortunate enough to be able to survive, just to be able to have an everyday normal life.
Right.
But that's the story of combat soldiers. I highly respect them. I can't tell you how much I admire, especially infantry guys.
Yeah.
What they had to live with and go through.
Copy that. So, what was Germany like in December of 1945 going into 1946? What was your experience of Germany?
I'll give you a little example of Würzburg, Germany. Germany, the American bombers were flying out of England round the clock, 24 hours, bombing the hell out of all of Germany's major industrial cities. Würzburg, when we got there, Würzburg, as far as the eye could see, was this huge piles of debris of everything that was actually destroyed. Very little was left standing. And what amazes me is, Andrew, if you remember, we had developed what they called the Marshall Plan at the end of the war, where, believe it or not, we spent billions and billions of American dollars to rebuild Germany and some of those other countries. And I've been back twice since then, and I'm amazed at how Germany was rebuilt because, as I said, my visions of not just Würzburg, but Regensburg, Stuttgart, I could go on and on. There was very little standing.
Right. My God. I ask because I've seen photographs and heard about just the destruction of the war, especially in Germany with the Allied bombing. I find it really interesting. Interesting's kind of a loaded word because it's a terrible thing. War is terrible, but it's just the Germans under Adolf Hitler. We're not going to surrender, and it took Hitler being himself penned in by the Soviets in Berlin and committing suicide for the regime to finally collapse, and Germany suffered terribly because of that. So you arrive in Germany and it was just rubble.
Yes.
Wow. What were the people like? What were the German people like at this time?
At that time, they were very loving, caring people. They would do anything for the American soldiers. They welcomed us with open arms, and eventually, as you know, as time went on, we rebuilt Germany, and Germany is what it is today. We have to deal with what exists over there today. So
copy that.
But I tell you, I've said this more times recently than I have, but we've got to make a huge decision. I watched our wars in Afghanistan and Korea and Iraq and what have you, and Vietnam especially. I've got so many friends that were Vietnam veterans. And I think we got to give a lot of deep thought before we submit our young kids to more war on foreign soil.
Yes.
It troubles me deeply. It troubles me because I sometimes wonder, what did we gain? We're watching now in Iraq, we're watching now in Afghanistan, 20 years, something. As I've gotten older, let's put it this way, I guess I've become more respectful for life itself.
Yes.
And to submit our young kids to something, World War II was a whole different thing. We knew we had to stop Adolf Hitler and the Nazism and communism. We knew we had to stop it. But I think we got to give our elected officials in both houses got to give a lot of more consideration, including the president, before we submit our young kids to wars in any foreign countries.
Well said.
I really do.
Well said.
China, look at. Let me tell you something.
Yeah.
China, I've watched this thing in China now for how many years? I couldn't believe that China has gotten such a strong foothold on our economy. You know, you go around just about anything you pick up today, Andrew, it's made in China.
Mm-hmm.
And they become, I don't want to say they outsmarted us, but they're pretty damn smart.
Mm-hmm.
Someone once said about the next war for America, it won't be external, they'll get us from within.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look around what's happening in our country today, underneath the surface, especially the last 8 or 10 years, the foothold that they've gotten, I mean, come on. Do we need socialists? Do we need extreme socialist people running our country? Let's get back to what America's really all about.
Mm-hmm.
And should get back to it, because if we don't, your family, your kids, and my grandchildren, they're going to be living in a totally different world than we grew up in. Copy that.
You know, building off of a point you've made, modern, you know, one of the things that I really confronted when I traveled and when I visited the American Beach or the American Cemetery at Omaha is, you know, the treasure that is our young people, our soldiers, you know, and the soldiers, you know, you look at their ages in that cemetery and they're all young. And when I was there, I was 24, and I was, you know, older than a lot of the fellows who were there. But, you know, something that I'm really passionate about is just trying to get people to think more deeply about the history of war. I think it's so important for people to understand what war is. So when it comes time to make the decision about fighting more war, and you said overseas, I 100% agree. I just want people to be informed and understand what they are sending our soldiers into. And that is partly my goal with, you know, modernizing the instruction of military history. I want it to reach people so that people can understand the reality of conflict, and also so we can integrate that into our national story, and we can move forwards and be better, and learn from our history. So I completely agree with you, sir. I completely agree with you.
Well, I'm sitting here right now, and you almost brought tears to my eyes because that deeply concerns me.
Yeah.
The lack of education.
Yeah.
The lack of telling people what price this country has paid for the freedoms we've got. These freedoms were never free. We paid for these freedoms with the blood of a lot of young soldiers, as you just said, never came back home.
Yeah.
And it concerns me that today in our nation, in our country, the wrong people have gotten hold of our education system.
Yeah.
They're not talking about what America, how America great it is. You want to go ahead and get all the education you want for your career or what you want to do the rest of your life, but let us not forget why you have the freedoms to be able to get that kind of an education, because you're not going to be able to do that in a lot of other countries.
Right.
So somehow or another, we've got to, at the grassroots level, I call it, we've got to have an education program that these young kids, instead of being told the wrong things or not being told at all about America, these young kids will have something to remember why they got the freedoms they've got, why they're able to do the things that they're able to do.
Yes.
And that's lacking. I feel that that's lacking terribly in our country, and that's because these teachers union and all these people in these teachers groups, they I don't know what's wrong that they don't see that.
Right.
I don't understand that.
It's you know, I have some very good friends. When I went to high school, I kept in contact with some of my high school teachers, and I love them all dearly. One of them's a history professor, Another one is my old photography teacher. I've kept in contact with both of them, and I love them dearly. And they have told me about some of the troubles that they face trying to just simply do their jobs in this country. But and I say that because I just want to put out there my incredible respect for the people on the front lines of our education system.
Yeah.
And you're talking about the grassroots level. This is it. I made the decision after visiting the American Cemetery at Omaha Beach. I mean, I had visited many places on that amazing trip that I had the privilege to take, but I knew at that moment I needed to do something. And I still have the diary I kept daily when traveling, and I look back at that diary about the incredible emotion I had about being at that place, and what can I do as an individual to help people understand this history. And so this is it. And again, you being here and giving me your time, giving the audience your time, the next generation your time is a vital part of that. So again, it is just an honor to have you with us, sir.
It's been an honor for me. It's been a privilege, distinct privilege for me to be able to talk with you and pour out from my heart my love for the country, my love for America, and we must never, never let anybody forget the price that we paid so we have the freedoms we've got today.
Copy that.
Anything that you can do to provide the kind of education to our people, and whatever you can do to remind people of why we have this great America, I tell you, I admire you for doing that. Any time that you spend doing that, it'll be very worthwhile, believe me.
Thank you, sir. As we move on here, I just want to ask you about what a day in the life of an occupation soldier was like in post-World War II Germany. What was your day-to-day there in the 1st Infantry Division?
Well, I was in the medical detachment, and I was trained to be a supervisor. I had 30 medics under my supervision.
Wow.
And I was supervisor of what they called the medical aid station. Mm-hmm. And now don't ask me how you remember crazy stuff like I remember, but 4929 Tarnell Avenue, Detroit, Michigan. Don't ask me how the hell I remember that, but that was the address of my battalion surgeon. Captain Hoffman was his name, Captain Hoffman.
Wow.
And he and I formed a very warm friendship professionally as well as, being the soldiers and what have you. And he taught me so much about, taking care of the soldiers and this and that and the other thing. But the life of every day working with these fellows was just a God-given experience. I can never forget. I'm going to tell you something. I wish, today I still think I'm right about this, and maybe at 94 you convince me elsewhere, but I still think that today, if every high school student upon senior graduating, if he were to serve a year to 18 months of military service, it could be the greatest thing that ever happened to him, because I know what it did for me. It taught me organization, it taught me structure, it taught me discipline, which is so crucial and important.
Yes.
And it taught me how to grow up from a boy to be a man. And I just, somehow or another, I wish that I know compulsory the thing is, and that may not happen, but my military service was the greatest thing that ever happened to me.
When did you?
I was very fortunate that God spared my life. 6 months sooner, and I would have been in a little bit different situation.
Yeah. When did you? Well, how long were you in the military?
Well, actually, I went in the service, as I said, July of 45, and I was honorably discharged in January of 47.
Gotcha. Yeah. What was that time? Were you in Germany that whole time?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yes. All through Germany. As I said, Regensburg, Stuttgart, Nuremberg, Würzburg, you name it.
I am an avid nerd when it comes to artifacts of military history. I have my grandfather's World War II Ike uniform. I have his Purple Heart, and those are my most cherished items. I have a photo of him wearing that very uniform. I never met him, but I am able to preserve that memory. When you were in Germany, what was the souvenir situation with all of the surplus German military gear and stuff floating around? And did you get any souvenirs while you were in Germany?
I'm just trying to think. I don't recall any. I really don't. I know there were a lot of those sort of things there, but whatever the reasons, it never occurred to me to, bring anything of that nature back with me.
No worries.
I know that I had during the Army occupation, I had a German woman who was a seamstress, and she made me a beautiful jacket out of parachute silk, believe it or not.
Whoa.
I'll never forget that. And I remember all she wanted was 3 packs of cigarettes and some chocolate bars.
Aw. Oh, that is cool.
Yeah. And my Eisenhower jacket, I loved my Eisenhower jacket, and somehow that disappeared.
Yeah.
And I was a great guy for following all of Dwight Eisenhower's career. Mm-hmm. It's amazing. If you haven't done that, you should do that. He was an amazing guy. Amazing. I
have read about. I'm not the. I can't say that I purposefully gone out and study his whole career, but yeah. I have studied the how do I put it, the very quite frankly, it was a Herculean task of working with General Patton and Field Marshal Montgomery and keeping them working in tandem. I know that Montgomery was a handful throughout the Second World War for Eisenhower to deal with, and there's been a research project I've been working on for quite some time, and I had to delve into that to understand why some things happened the way they did on the ground level. But Eisenhower, and also, I've read accounts of him personally visiting paratroopers before D-Day, and it's just it speaks to his personality and his character and his accountability as a leader, that if I remember correctly, he had done everything he could up to the night of June 5th. Yes. He had done everything he could, and he was so nervous inside that the only thing he could do is just go be amongst the men who were about to parachute into Normandy. And there's some incredibly famous and wonderful photographs of him visiting men of the 101st Airborne Division, and you can just see the look on his face. His hands are in his pockets. Yeah. He's having honest conversation with these guys because he just needs to be amongst the men at that point. And I think I love photographs. I love artifacts. I love, tangible pieces of history, not just writing in a page. And again, that's why I love speaking with folks who have been there and done that, such as yourself.
Yeah. If you get a chance, I just finished reading a book a couple of months ago. It was written by Susan Eisenhower, his granddaughter. Mm-hmm. And I think its title is Ike's Life or something like that. Yeah. And it's the most detailed story of Dwight and his military career, his family life, about Mamie, his wife, and he was just a remarkable guy. And I often wondered, that is the reason that they chose him to be the Allied Commander-in-Chief, because he had a personality. He was always the middle of the road. He was never an extremist, one extreme or the other. Right. And that's the way I live my life. I'm down the middle of that road. I could go either way. Right. But that was Eisenhower. I think there's no question in my mind. But again, what worries me is, in our high schools, they're not teaching American history like they should.
Right.
And these people should be made aware of who our great leaders were.
Right. Right.
And you mentioned the one general, old blood and guts.
Yeah.
And and he was something else. Do you remember the Battle of the Bulge when they were surrounded, and the Krauts, we call them Krauts in German, those Krauts wanted them to surrender, and the American general, I can't think of his name.
McAuliffe.
Yeah, he said, "Tell them nuts. We're not going to surrender. Nuts."
General McAuliffe.
Yeah. As we dropped paratroopers behind the lines, and we broke up broke it up, and we won the Battle of the Bulge.
So Anthony, for the listeners who are following along here, Mr. Long and I are reminiscing on the encirclement of Bastogne in December of 1944, where the 101st the 101st Parachute Infantry Division was thrown in to hold the vital crossroads of Bastogne, and the actual commander of that division, Maxwell Taylor, was in London at the time for a wedding, if I remember correctly. He was not with his division, and Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, I think he was a brigadier general. I hope I'm getting that correctly. Anyways, General McAuliffe was the second in command, and he was thrown into Bastogne with that unit, and he rose to the challenge admirably. At one point, the Germans said, "Hey, you guys should surrender," and it was McAuliffe's aide, actually, who was right with him, and McAuliffe was kind of like, "Man, what should we say?" And his aide said, "Well, that first thing you said would work." And McAuliffe said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, you said nuts. When you got that note, you said, well, nuts." So that's what they said to the German commander, nuts, ! And that shows the tenacity of those men, and the tenacity of all soldiers who had to fight that terrible campaign. Did you... In 1947, when you were discharged, what was your next step in life? What was your step coming back to civilian life?
Well, I came back home, and as I said, I was drafted out of high school. So at that point in place, it really messed up my career. I was thinking of Major League Baseball. I was being scouted by the old Brooklyn Dodgers, which used to be in Brooklyn, New York, and they moved to Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And I was really excited about that possibility. And then when we got down to camp, we were in Georgia, where they had a regimental baseball team down there, believe it or not, and half the guys on that team were all professional ball players, guys like Carl Shai was a pitcher for the old Pittsburgh Pirates. And
wow.
A couple of other guys that were players for the Brooklyn Dodgers and other teams, but obviously, then when we all got shipped out after our training, that was the end of that. So when I got home, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and but I had all the opportunities in the world, and that's the other thing. I don't want anybody to ever forget our younger people in this country. You can be anything you want to be, and you can be all you are capable of being, and that still exists today. But unfortunately, it's not talked enough about the way it should be. Mm-hmm. So I came home, and I didn't know for sure what I wanted to do. But then, of course, I come out of the military, out of the medical detachment, and I really developed a liking for something in the healing arts. So I came home, and I didn't know for sure. Dentistry didn't excite me. I didn't want to spend another 7-10 years in medical school, what have you. So I had some relatives that had great experiences with chiropractors. And so I talked with them and found out who their chiropractors were, and I took the time to call them and spend some time with them. And so I ended up going to the Palmer College of Chiropractic in Davenport, Iowa. Mm-hmm. And it was under the GI Bill of Rights. Now, the GI Bill of Rights, by the way, was the greatest piece of legislation that Congress ever passed. And at least they did something worthwhile.
Right.
I hate to say that.
Yes, sir.
But it was at the time. And as a result of that, all of my tuition was paid. Books were paid. I got $90 a month subsistence, which was great in those days. My roommate was another veteran from Salt Lake City, Utah. He was a Mormon, and so I attended the Powder College. I wanted to finish as quick as I could, so instead of spending 4 years there, I just went all year round. Summertime, I finished in 3 years.
Wow.
And I came back home, and I started up a practice, and I built a beautiful practice, and I practiced for 25 years, and in 1984 I retired.
Wow.
From chiropractic, yeah.
What's your retirement look like? What have you been doing with your time?
Well, I've been spending a lot of time with the veterans organizations. As I told you, I felt my life was spared for some reason or other, and I owed it to the veterans organizations. I spent a lot of time with the American Legion. I spent a lot of time, as I told you, down at our military park. And I, of course, retirement. I was 54 years old, and I decided I think I should start playing golf.
Oh.
So I went to my late wife was a championship golfer. She was a school teacher, could play all summer long.
Whoa.
And I wasn't playing, and I realized, so I decided to play, but I went to a party one night with a guy that was a champion amateur golfer, and I said, again, you remember his crazy stuff. I said, Fred Brewer, the guy was vice president of a big automobile agency here. I said, I got to take up this game of golf. And he said, John, forget it. I said, what do you mean, forget it? He said, you got 2 strikes against you. I said, why? He says, you're too old to start and you're left-handed. The next morning, I called a pro golfer, and I set up my first 8 lessons. I fell in love with the game. Yeah, I struggled for a year, but I loved the game. I fell in love with it until this year when I got hit with that COVID thing back in February. I was pretty sick for a few weeks and survived that. So I haven't played this year, but I was last year playing 9 holes twice a week.
Copy that. You were talking to somebody with an incurable right hand shank. If I am driving, I am going to shank right so hard, and I don't. It's embarrassing. It's really embarrassing. I'm really good with an iron, and I'm really good on the green. I can chip out of the rough, get it real close to the hole. But man, if I am driving off the tee, it's going into the woods. So for that reason and that reason alone, I haven't golfed for quite some time. But I was on the golf team in high school, and it was a lot of fun.
That's a great story because I was left-handed, as I said, and I had this kind of what I call a banana ball. I always go off to the left, right? So I had this friend, Jack Henrich. He was a professional instructor. He got to be a very close friend of mine. So one day I'm playing with him, and he's watching me, and I said, this is very annoying to me. I have to go over all the time, get my ball off the edge of the rough or something. And he says, John, your right hand, turn your knuckles around so you can see the top of the 3 knuckles on your right hand when you're teeing off. You know something, man? I did that, and you know what? My ball straightened out. I've been hitting the ball straight. Nobody can believe it. At my age, I'm still hitting the ball straight down the middle of the fairway.
God bless you. God bless you. That's so...
By
the
way, both of those guys died. The guy that said I was too old to start, and Jack Henrich died about 3 years ago.
Oh. I'm sorry to hear it. That being said, you are still playing, so I'm sure he's... From somewhere, he has a big smile on his face. That he was proven wrong. So, there's always, I think we're drawn a little close to the end here, and I wanted to ask you a question I always ask veterans when they're on my show. You said that you're very passionate about working with veterans, very passionate about working with veterans associations.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you the same question I've asked every veteran that's come on my show.
Sure.
And that is, when you were coming out of the military, what did you do to successfully and healthily reintegrate with society? I ask this question because 22 veterans a day commit suicide in this country. And if they can hear, if anyone who is going through tough time, and not even veterans, people who are in civilian life sometimes go through traumatic things, and they need to hear what it's like for somebody who has gone through something significant, and then came back from it, and you opened your own practice, you went to school. What was that process for you like, sir, coming back from the military, coming back from Germany, and being trained to kill and becoming a civilian again? And how did you do that successfully?
Well, if you'll recall, fortunately for me, I did not have to enter into combat. And as I said, we were trained to kill or be killed. I do not know what effect it would have had on me in combat if I had to take other lives, the enemy's lives. So I did not have to deal with that. However, I have so many friends that did come back home from combat with terribly traumatic emotional scars. And I spent a lot of time with those people. I have a situation where I have maybe half a dozen. If they call climbing into the rabbit hole, where they become very depressed and they get to the edge of thinking it's no longer worthwhile, I call them, I talk with them, I might have coffee with them. I do whatever I can to help my fellow veterans to get through those difficult times that they're all faced with.
Right.
No matter how long I could tell you of guys that, in Iraq and Afghanistan, Vietnam especially, so many Vietnam guys.
Yeah.
And I spend the time with guys that we have a wonderful Veterans Administration hospital here in Buffalo. And a friend of mine is the head of that. He's a he's a West Pointer, and he's a lieutenant colonel, and very close friends with me. And I spend time with him, and whenever any guy is brought to my attention that's having a tough time, I make a point of talking with him. As I said, I always felt I was my life was spared for some reason or other. God spared my life, and I still think to this day one of the reasons was because I was destined to be a healer, to help other people find their way in life, to find a way to make them find a better life for themselves. And I've continued to spend my life doing that. I will to my dying day.
Copy that. And as a citizen in this country, I thank you for that. Because that is a civic service.
Well, I can tell you off the top of my head, a lot of guys used to call me, I was a staff sergeant, and a lot of guys call me a kick-ass staff sergeant, but there's reasons you have to do that. You got to pick somebody up and make them feel better about themselves and try to get them stop dwelling upon the worst things in their lives. One guy, another staff sergeant, Patrick Welch, he's a Vietnam guy, and he lives maybe about 10 miles from here, and I have it arranged with Pat. Anytime, Pat, you're climbing in that rabbit hole, you call me.
Yeah. We'll
get you out of there. And I can name a half a dozen other different guys that I counsel with and work with, and that's what life is all about. Our fellow man, the life in itself is a gift. Oh my God, when you think about it, it's such a beautiful, wonderful gift.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why, as I've gotten older, I'm 94, and I hope next year about this time you'll give me a call again. I'm still here to talk to you, but that's what life is all about, and your experience in your life, as I said, in my case, I just love life. I love America. I love my country, and nothing could stand in the way. Right now, we had in the city of Buffalo recently, there was a primary. We had a Democrat mayor and a nice guy, really nice guy, Byron Brown's name, and he was running for re-election for his third term, and he had a primary fight. I like blue sky. a Democrat socialist.
Mm-hmm.
Surprised him, and a small amount of people came out to vote, but this woman, she won the election.
Mm-hmm.
And well, nobody wants to see Democrat socialists take over this country. It's not been successful. You name one country that you can name to be where Marxism or socialism has been successful.
Mm-hmm.
And we sure as hell don't need that here in America, and we sure as hell don't need it in the city of Buffalo. And I'm working with his campaign group because they're going to have a general election, and it'll be what they call a write-in campaign.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But anything you do to keep America great as it is, and so nobody steals it from us, you can look around. I know you're doing, and you see what's happening in this country.
Mm-hmm.
I can't believe some of these people in Congress today that want to destroy all of the things that we've bled for to have the freedoms we've got. It's unbelievable.
Copy that.
Yeah.
Well, I think we have reached the end of our interview. We have had the privilege of Dr. John Long, 1st Infantry Division veteran, World War II occupation of Germany, kick-ass staff sergeant, self-proclaimed. And it has been an honor, sir, and a privilege. I really appreciate you spending your time. Thank you so much.
Andrew, it's a privilege, and God bless you. God bless America. If you ever get here around Western New York and Buffalo, you be sure to call me, and I'll show you a great time around Western New York.
I think the closing sentiment for the interview here is going to be, life is precious, and God bless America.
Absolutely. God bless you, Andrew. Don't ever hesitate to call me.
Copy that.